The Rochester City Council candidate forum continues.
Welcome back to our ABC6 Rochester Post Bulletin debate for candidates running for Rochester's City Council in Wards 2, 4, and 6, and for the candidates who are running in the soon-to-be vacated seat of Rochester City Council President. This debate is being broadcast live right now on ABC6's social media platforms. For those who are watching live online, do feel free to write in your questions. Our producers are fielding those questions. Our last couple of segments, we have not been able to get to at least two of our viewer questions because of time. I am your co-moderator, Betsy Singer with ABC6 News, along with Randy Peterson with the Rochester Post Bulletin. For those who are watching online and who have written about the face masks and questioning why the candidates are not wearing them, nor am I, and when Randy asks his questions why he is not having his face mask on. That is for clarity purposes and under the governor's mandate with the face masks that went into effect last night at midnight. For broadcast purposes, we're not required as long as we have the correct social distancing, which we do in this room here at 125 Live in Rochester. With that said, I am going to introduce our first round of Ward 6 candidates. And I will start with Todd Pizarski, who is a manager and leader of business operations, a retired Army officer, a Gulf War veteran, auditor at the Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor, assisting in the legislative oversight of our state government. Tom Rigby is a retired certified public accountant. Says he believes in financial frugality, strategic partnerships, and a dedication to a green energy industry. Donovan Bailey is a social worker with Olmsted County Public Defender's Office. He's a cultural competence facilitator and works with Recovery is Happening. Previously, he was a police officer and residential treatment supervisor. With that said, gentlemen, I will give you 1 minute for your opening statements. And Todd, we will start with you.
Yep. Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Todd Pizarski. First, I want to thank our hosts, 125 Live, ABC, KAAL, and the Post Bulletin to allow the residents to learn more about their candidates. And I also want to ask the residents for their support, for their vote on and before August 11th. I settled here in Rochester about 8 years ago with my life partner, Christine. I am a retired Army officer. I served 20 years of active federal service. Most of my adult life, I've been a public servant. Besides my military career, as alluded to, as an auditor with the Office of the Legislative Auditor auditing the state. I am a licensed CPA. I am a certified fraud examiner. I understand government and government oversight. I am involved in the community. I'm a volunteer board member with the Lotus Health Foundation, and I also assist the Rochester Korean War Veterans Club. I believe political office is a civic duty. It should not be confused as a career or a profession. Currently, I believe the existing council has lost touch with the residents and continuing ways to seek to increase our taxes, reduce services, and ignore the needs and the wants of the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Randy, for being here to give us these questions. Thank you to 125 Live for hosting this. My wife, Marilyn, and I moved into Ward 6 7 years ago. We consider it our home. We really love it here, and I'm looking forward to representing the people of the ward. One of the things that I have done since moving in is I did become a board member of 125 Live, so this is kind of like my home turf. But I had nothing to do with the organization of this debate. I want to make sure that's known, that I didn't have any discussions with anyone about it other than I would show up. But I do want the citizens of Ward 6 and the citizens of Rochester to know that as a board member and as treasurer for 125 Live. In 2017, I gave freely of over 700 hours to the organization when the organization needed help on the financial end. I did another 500 hours in 2018, and I continue to supervise the preparation of the financial statements and answer questions regarding where to get money, how to get money, where to spend it, and what's appropriate in that area. This, as well as being a board member here. This is relevant to me from the standpoint that there's a lot of question as to whether it's your civic duty to serve the city of Rochester for free. And the way the council is constituted now, I don't believe you should, because it's set up as a body that micromanages as opposed to one that just supervises what goes on. So I want the people of Rochester to know, the people of Ward 6, that I do volunteer my time. I volunteer my time at church, but I think that unless the citizens of Rochester want to change the way the city council operates, a salary is appropriate.
Tom, thank you. Donovan.
Thank you, 125 Live, KAAL, and the Post Bulletin for hosting this. This is a great opportunity and a joke. It's kind of intimidating coming on your home court here, Tom. So I will do my best to bring my A game.
Good, good.
In addition to who I am and what was introduced, I was appointed on the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage from the governor in 2008. I served there 2008 to 2012. That was via Governor Pawlenty. He appointed me to that council, as well as I've done a lot of other community works service, particularly here locally. I'm on the 3rd District Equal Justice Committee, also on the Olmsted County DFO or Community Corrections group. I've served on the Minnesota Teen Challenge Advisory Group. As well, I'm a part of an online show called Barbershop Talk South Minnesota. We do a great job in talking about such issues from a ethnic and African American standpoint. And I also love the fact that I'm a social worker. One of the things I do in the summer is I am a social worker for young victims of burns in Denver, Colorado, and I love to do that. I'm also an AAU girls basketball coach. I love to do those two different things. Then also I'm a father of 2 awesome kids, DJ and Mariah, and I am very thankful for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, and welcome candidates. We're going to start off with a viewer question, which seems appropriate in a race that has 6 candidates. The question is, some Rochester voters have asked for the adoption of ranked choice voting for city council and mayoral races. Do you support ranked choice voting? And we'll start with Donovan.
And let me add, I am running on the platform of cultural competency. You will hear that weave through my answers, and I believe it as a philosophy. But to answer your question, I am a supporter of ranked choice voting. I believe it does support diversity, and also it helps with this this atmosphere of mudslinging, if you will. It really helps to make things pretty clean. So I am a supporter of ranked choice voting. Thank you.
And Tom?
I also am a supporter of ranked choice voting. I think that in the Ward 6 specific instance, we could be starting our campaigning now and going through November, and people would have a clear choice between 6 different people instead of having to narrow it down to 2. So I think it's a good idea. I also got an interesting comment from one of the people that supports ranked choice voting as far as whether we need to think globally from a local basis, meaning is our federal government, is our state government really addressing the issues that we would like addressed, or do we need to take that upon ourselves locally? And I really think that's an interesting idea to pursue, especially in these times where they don't seem to be able to get anything done at other government levels.
Thank you. And Todd?
Yeah, I think ranked choice voting, there can be a lot of plus sides to ranked choice voting. Some of the comments that have already been said. It'd certainly look at reducing the cost, I think, of the election itself, but also the cost of the campaigns, too. I still want to see some simulations on how the tallies are performed. I think it's from a very simplistic approach. it might work. But I think that this is also a question that would have to go directly to the people on a referendum on how they want to elect their representatives. Because this somewhat turns the concept of voting a little bit upside down. So I think it's important that the people would have to weigh in, the residents would have to weigh in on how they want to elect their representatives.
Thank you.
The recent pay raises the council approved caught a lot of attention. Many agreed that the pay hadn't been increased in years, and council members were not being compensated for the work that they were doing as a council member. Others argued that the 140% increases were far too costly, and the position of public servant should not come at such a high cost to taxpayers. Your thoughts on those pay increases, and is it by chance a reason you're running? Tom, we'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. I have a problem with the process of how the pay raises were done, but not necessarily to the point that was ended up. As I started to allude to in my opening comments, I think the residents of Rochester need to take a look at the way City Council does their business and decide whether they really want a council that is micromanagers, where you have to know something about zoning, you have to know about budgets, you have to know about transportation, you have to know about parklands and park facilities. You have to know how to do human resource items, be intelligent enough to vote on all of those things. If that's what the City of Rochester wants, then the people need to be paid that are in that position so that they can take the time to learn the job and learn all of the issues that come up and respond appropriately to them.
Is the compensation factoring in at all to your decision to run for City Council?
No, I decided way ahead of that compensation, and as I said, I'll serve for nothing if that's what the decision is, but I think it's appropriate at this time, given the way it is. I think the City Council and the Charter Commission should look at whether or not to have a different form of government, whether it's a strong mayor or whether it's a strong city administrator, that the council just supervises the policy and that administrator, and everything else is done at the city employee level rather than all of the hearings and everything done now.
Very good, Tom. Thank you. Donovan?
I continue to say through my campaign, I think there are three major issues that any politician will deal with going forward after the election of November 3rd. That is the COVID-19, the civic unrest, and then this idea of what type of city Rochester wants to be. As I consider this question, I want to think about that latter one. What type of city do we want to be here in Rochester? This is the third largest city in the state, an internationally renowned city. This is an amazing city. When you think of the City Council, think about that question. Now, I do agree the process wasn't the best. However, when we think about this great city, I think the compensation does match with what we are doing here. This is an amazing city, and therefore amazing folks need to be on the City Council. With that in mind, I'm not running because of the salary increase. My passion was basically grew from what I do daily in the community and via my job. So that wasn't my motivation. But I will say this, and think about this also. When you raise that salary, guess what? You get diversity in those that can run. Because if you're a single mom or you don't have the income and you can't balance, but yet you have a great ethic, you have a great ability to lead, you have a great way to lead the City Council, if you don't have that requisite pay, you can't run for office. So think about it in that way. Again, the process was suspect, but given the city we are, great thing.
Very good. Todd?
Yes. Yes. The decision in part played into my deciding to run for city council member. Not entirely, though. But when you look at the way the pay raise was conducted, within 3 weeks of the adopted budget, the city council went ahead and passed themselves a pay raise. Is it enough? I don't know. I think that's something that we need to look at, having a process very similar to the state for their legislators on how they get paid or how much they get paid. When we look at the city ordinances lay out the authority of the city council. And it says that the city council is the legislative body. They conduct legislative activities, i.e. they pass bills or the ordinances. But they also provide some oversight, and they also provide the appointment of individuals to different boards that the mayor may nominate. So when you look at the ordinances, it says that the city council will conduct at least one meeting per month. So I don't know, it's a tough question. Is it enough? Is it not enough? Is it too much? But we have to look at the authority of where the council receives the authority. On that, also the mayor's salary. You know, the ordinance also spells out what the mayor's job is. It says that the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city and supervises all the departments and offices underneath it. So when we hear about full-time, part-time, hey, that kind of gives the nature of a full-time position.
Thank you.
Thank you. The City Council recently approved a plan for $5.1 million in federal CARES Act funding in response to the pandemic. What additional steps does the city need to take to help individuals and businesses recover? Let's start with Todd.
So I said the other night, this is probably one of Rochester's #1 current issues. But not just because of the COVID effects. And just by chance, this happens to be one of the cornerstones of my platform. But right now, all of Rochester's eggs are in one basket, right? Rochester is banking on DMC. But what does that mean? Well, it means that we do have a fragile economy. And when we look at the comprehensive plan continues to say, hey, we're going to require more low-wage jobs out there. We're going to need more low-wage workers, and we're going to have to subsidize these workers. I mean, that's in the comprehensive plan. So we need to begin to identify industrial areas within Rochester and begin the planning and the development of infrastructure where we can invite companies that have meaningful jobs or meaningful compensation for our residents.
Thank you. And Tom, same question. What additional steps does the city need to take to help individuals and businesses recover?
Well, I think you first have to look at what was done. In allocating the CARES money, there was $1 million that was allocated to helping small business, and there was $750,000 that was allocated for jobs. The Post Bulletin had a good summary of that today in their paper, and I agree that that was appropriate money. Some people do not, because they think planting trees, what are we doing for that? Why are we clearing brush? Well, we're creating jobs, and those people that get the money from those jobs can spend their money at the small businesses, so that's very helpful. What else does the City Council need to do? Well, I think in examining the budget this year, we know there's probably going to be some cuts, but a lot of effort should be looked at as far as where is the money spent best that supports local businesses, supports local residents, and pays for what is needed, not what we want at this time, because a cornerstone of my campaign is keeping property taxes in check, and that's very important at this time because of the loss of jobs and businesses in the city.
Thank you. And Donovan, same question. What additional steps does the city need to take to help individuals and businesses recover?
I do think the CARES Act is great, and certainly we can anchor off of that and do more things. I'm going to agree with Todd. We need to diversify. We need to attract other major businesses to this town. Mayo is great, DMC is certainly awesome, but we need other businesses here as we grow 120,000 plus in population. So we need to attract other businesses here that would bring more jobs to our area. One of the things I would push is this idea of reimagining DMC, if it can be done. I don't know all the bylaws of DMC, but that is a big plan sponsored by the state money. What can we do to reimagine that to make sure that we support our area? And then a real bitter pill here. Sociologically, we are in a 100 years pandemic. And to some degree, we just have to buckle down and get through it. With that said, in some of our greatest times here in America, that's when innovation happens. That's when a lot of things happen to change the plight of our situation. So definitely depend on the city with what they can do, but we as a citizenry, from churches to neighbors and what have you, we need to begin to work together, get through some of the political rhetoric and all that type of thing, and work together as a people to get through this time. We are in a tough time. There's no question about it. There's some stuff that the city can do, but we need to have a psychological understanding that we are going through a tough time, and we first need to get over this pandemic.
Thank you.
Most, if not all, city council candidates have expressed a desire to limit property tax increases, especially in the wake of COVID-19. How long should that continue, and what do you expect to see as a long-term impact with that? Todd, let's start with you.
Could you just say the first part of that question again?
Most, if not all, city council candidates have expressed a desire to limit property tax increases because of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, and this is part of what I'm talking about too. We keep hearing about another good, great idea, a parks improvement. Well, that's a great idea on top of all what we already have. So what I would look at is, let's take a look at how long. Well, until we get through part of recovery. We don't even know what the full effects are yet. We don't know what next year is going to bring, or the year after that. You know, right now there's a big move to work remotely. I think it's been public out there that about 20,000 folks from Mayo will stay working remotely. Well, what is that going to do to the property values in the downtown, in the DMC area? We're going to have a glut of commercial property that is vacant. So we still have to first understand what the effects are, and then we need to develop our priorities, revisit our priorities. What's important? What do we want to get done? And that is where we fund. When we go work down the priority list and there's no more money, well, we draw the line. And some things may get deferred, some things may have to get canceled altogether.
Tom, you want me to repeat that, or?
Yes, please.
Most, if not all, city council candidates have expressed a desire to limit property taxes because of COVID-19. How long should that continue, and what do you expect to see then as a long-term impact?
I think the long-term impact of limiting property taxes is we're not going to get to do all the projects that we want to as quickly as we can, because probably where you are able to limit the most is in the construction of new things, new roads, new buildings, whatever the city has on their agenda, and repairs and maintenance gets deferred. We may be able to reconfigure how jobs are done at the city and maybe eliminate some. But you have to go through the process, and you do it until we catch up to where our businesses and our people are working again. They're earning the same money, if not more, than they started with before the pandemic. And even then, I think the city needs to work really closely with the school board and the county to make sure that the level of property tax increase is not as high as it's been the 7 years I've owned a home here, because in total that's been 39%, which is pretty close to 6% a year. That's really high. But that's not just the city, that includes the county and the school board also. So we need to come up with a way that limits the amount of increases by all three of those bodies.
I would agree with that as well. Property taxes need to be lessened. And I'm going to agree with Todd. I think there needs to be a comprehensive meeting, plan committee, however the city does it. Okay, how do we get through the next 2 to 4 years? What are we going to do from a budgetary standpoint to get through these 2 years? Let's talk about with the community what we need to cut off of that so we can get through that plan. I think that is very, very key, and that's with respect to what the Rochester City Council has already done and the mayor. I'm not sure what they've done, but that's what I would ask for. Let's get together. Again, psychologically realize we're going through a pandemic, and what budgetarily can we do for the next 2 to 4 years? That may mean construction. That may mean some jobs, some of those things. But I will say this again. We are the city of Rochester. If you've ever lived in a different city, you realize we have a lot of things that other cities do not have. This is a great place to live. So we may need to cut some things back until we get there, but I guarantee you some of the things that we need to cut back on, we can deal with it because we are a great city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And what actions would you support to address the rising cost of housing in the city? Well, let's start with Tom.
Well, is that on a real basis or an average basis? Meaning is, which end are we looking at? But I'm assuming we're going to look at the low end of the housing cost because that's where the problem is. People are not able to buy housing at the lower incomes or get into housing. Certainly there's talk that the red tape is too much, that there's too many steps you have to go in, and it increases the price. Certainly you hear that builders can't afford to build at the cost where low-income people can buy. So you need to address those issues as you go along. But one idea that I have had just recently that I don't know how we would implement it, but I think one of the things that's talked about is restitution for people of color where they've been kept down for so long. Maybe then rather direct payouts, that's in the form of giving them ownership in where they're living in the low-income housing so that when they're ready to move, they have some equity. Because one of the hardest things to getting started and buying a house is being able to save for the equity, which is really tough for low-income people. So it's a very broad problem that needs some creative solutions for it.
Thank you. Donovan, same question.
I think this goes into the guys that I've talked about is with the idea of let's think about what type of city we want to become. And this is a tough question because DMC started and boom, a lot of things started to grow. The median household income is around $70,000. I think we've decided as a city, and this is based on our actions, that we are a gentrified city. And it's happening around the nation, so I don't want to pinpoint us. I think in this regard, first of all, we need to figure out, okay, what type of city do we want to become? I think we've decided that, which means property taxes will continue to be high and go up. That's just my opinion. However, I think what we can do if we decide to be this gentrified city, we need to work with Olmsted County, other cities around us, and say, how do we work with this region? Because we know we are the med city, right? High salaries for our doctors and nurses and so on and so forth. Not a bad thing, but that's the reality of Rochester, Minnesota. How do we work with our region to have affordable housing for people to live in this region and transportation to come to work here? I think it's the reality that we're dealing with, and I think as soon as we understand we are mid-city, we are a city of many doctors and high-paid salaries. How do we twist from there? And that to me means working with Olmsted County and other Three Rivers and other places, other cities to figure out, okay, how do we do this together? Because it looks like we're just going to keep building and going. Thank you.
Thank you. And Todd, same question.
Yeah, I think here in Rochester, we are somewhat fortunate. We're fortunate because Rochester is growing. It does have growth. We're one of the fastest growing cities in the state. We're also in the rankings within the United States as the fastest growing city. So with that growth comes increase in prices. When the demand outpaces the supply, you have a general rise in prices. So for affordable housing, I kind of look at what we're doing as a city. So I look at our strategy and our policy, and we find that within the comprehensive plan. And I've said this before, the comprehensive plan is designed, the way it's written now is designed to keep that gap growing. Bring in more low-wage workers to do what? For one purpose, to service DMC. So in order to solve part of this problem, we need to look elsewhere. We need to diversify our economy. We need to bring in businesses that do provide meaningful compensation, not just low wage to do one thing in one location. So we need to look at the rest of the city as well. When we raise taxes, we raise the cost. When we increase regulations, we increase the cost. So overall, I find some flaw within our strategy and our policies, and that is the comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Final question before we get to closing statements. 4 years ago, the City Council approved the purchase and remodel of the Think Bank building in the northwest part of town for a new police precinct, in part to ease overcrowding downtown at the Government Center. The cost of the building was $3.2 million. To renovate, it was $500,000. Where do you stand on spending money on local law enforcement when it comes to them adding resources, adding equipment, and more police officers? Donovan.
I want to applaud our police department and what they're doing. I think they're doing a great job. And in a city like this, again, an internationally renowned city, a great city with a major employer like Mayo, we need to make sure that our police force is great. And if that means bolstering our police department, I would be in support of that. However, the times have called for this. If there would be additional funding, it would be along the lines of crime prevention. And we hear that we have social workers that are being added to the crime prevention office. I would upgrade that to where you have someone leading that entity and making sure that we have a preventative element towards our police department. In these economic times, I would not add to that. But if I did add to that, I would add that social service element, that crime prevention element to the police department. So I applaud where the money is going. I do not think in a city like this you will see a reduction. I don't think the citizens will go for a reduction in policing in a town like this, again, internationally around town. And I think that's where, when you hear this defunding police idea, get real on the city of Rochester. That's just me keeping it real with you. But if I did add to that, it would be along the crime prevention and social service end, so we can prevent things, and then our officers can continue to do, chief and sheriff can continue to do what they do best.
Where do you stand on spending money on local law enforcement when it comes to adding resources, equipment, and officers?
Well, I think it's one of the top priorities as needed. I don't cater to the defund police idea, but I do think that an examination looking inward in the police department about how services are provided needs to be done, such as getting the officers out in the community more, such as adding more social workers. I think there's a little confusion. The social workers that have been added are being paid by the county, I believe, at this point in time. I don't think the city has done anything along those lines yet. So that may be something that we have to look up at the mix of people, not cutting the budget, but looking at the mix of people and making sure that they have their equipment. But it will have to be prioritized right along with everything else as to who gets the share of dollars that we have to allocate in the city.
Thank you, Tom. Todd?
Yes. So I think here it's starting with kind of looking at the front end instead of, why don't we take a look at what do we want our police force to do? What are the objectives of the police force? And this is, I think, where we need to engage the community to answer those questions of what's the objective of the police force. From there, then we can tailor a force. We can train properly. We can recruit properly. We can equip properly to that objective in that goal. I've been like I said, I was a military officer for 20 years. We'd never just throw anything at an issue or a problem. We would first design what is our end state, what is it that we want to accomplish, that goal, and then we would tailor our operation, our task force to accomplish that mission. Same thing as an auditor. You just don't go in and start auditing. No, you create an audit objective. What is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to look at? And then you can develop the methods on how you're going to achieve that. So we first have to start out with what is it that we want them to do. Before we go and spend money, we start to reconfigure, and I haven't heard any of that. I haven't heard any of that discussion, and that's what I would like to do.
Let's conclude with our closing statements. And Todd, we will start with you.
Sure. Once again, I want to thank the sponsors for this event. And again, this has allowed the residents here and watching to learn a little bit more about their candidates. And I'm asking the Ward 6 candidates for your vote, for me, Todd Pizarski, on or before August 11th. Please cast your vote. My plan is to listen to the residents, because the residents are the experts when it comes to setting the priorities within the community. And what differentiates me from some of my fellow candidates? One, I believe political office is a civic duty, and it should not be confused as a career or a profession. I believe that the residents' voice is the most important voice. I understand what it means to be a public servant. I served. I'm willing to say enough is enough. We need to live within our constraints and not seek inventive ways to reach into the pockets of the residents to increase taxes. Residents must come first. Residents should not suffer for the sake of an initiative or a project. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, first of all, before I forget, because I have a tendency to do that, I want to ask the residents of Ward 6 to vote for me on or before August 11th. I do believe that I can be a representative who listens to what you want and helps to get it enacted. I would like to talk about some things, just some loose ends here for a minute. I heard Donovan and Todd discuss diversifying, and I think part of what DMC is doing is diversifying away from Mayo, but it's staying in the medical line. With the Discovery Square, there's lots of new businesses coming in from out of the area, so diversification is happening with DMC. Regarding the pay raises, I do want to say that I am in favor of creating a commission to study what the raises should be each year. I understand from Councilman Wojcik that that was tried to be implemented a few years back and was vetoed by the mayor. I think that needs to be relooked at. There's a talk of an $80 million bond issue for the Park and Rec. I think that just needs to be tabled for now until the COVID crisis is over and we know where the city stands on funding everything else. And for my friend Sylvia back in the back, and so that the people of Ward 6 know this, one area I would not cut is the support for the partners of the city, including 125 Live, Civic Theater, and the Arts Center. Rather, I think the city needs to sit down with those three concerns and figure out a way in which they can be run and budgeted so that they give the benefit to the city that they're supposed to, rather than having to stretch and scrounge for funding all of the time. And finally, I would just say, people of Ward 6, people of Rochester, people of America, keep protesting. We're in a really strange time. There seems like there's some tyrannical things going on. One way to keep that from happening is to protest.
Thank you. Donovan.
Thank you. On May 25th, we all witnessed the unfortunate and ugly murder of George Floyd, and some 4 years earlier, the murder of Philando Castile. On May 28th, the Minneapolis DA came out with a public announcement when the city was in an uproar that they had not made decisions on arrests. That night, the city went into another uproar, and I, as a citizen of Minnesota, cringed that the DA could not come to a solid decision to put those officers, not all officers, but certainly those officers, under arrest for what they did. On May 31st, the governor appointed Attorney Keith Ellison, our district attorney, or excuse me, our state attorney, to this. Shortly thereafter, all 4 officers were in handcuffs or arrested for their offenses. Keith Ellison is a man of color, and there's no question that Keith Ellison has a record that precedes his culture, but no question about it. When you put that man in that type of responsibility, he was going to make sure that those officers were arrested because he understood what it meant when it comes to police violence. And again, I'm not talking about all police, I'm talking about those police. Our Rochester Police Department and Sheriff's Department are doing a great job, our mayor as well, to change issues here, and I applaud them. We just hired or moved over 3 social workers. I talked to the leaders, sheriff and chief. All 3 social workers are Euro-American or white. Now go with me here. 1 in 3 black men are in the criminal justice system. 30 to 40% of the criminal justice system are people of color or African American. And I can go on and on. We've talked about poverty, housing as it relates to those of color. When you put 3 Euro-American people in the place where they're supposed to navigate for the police, when you have high totals of African Americans and other minorities, it's a real slap in the face. And I'm not saying that our leaders are not doing well, but this is where we need cultural competence in our leadership. My name is Donovan Bailey. I'm running for Rochester City Ward 6 on a platform of cultural competence because we're making mistakes in this call for change. Everyone is calling for change, but you need to put real people in there to get change done, and we need it. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. That concludes the first round of our Ward 6 candidates for Rochester City Council. We will take a quick break, come back with our second round for Ward 6.
So candidate forum continues.
Welcome back to our ABC 6 Rochester Post Bulletin debate for candidates running for Rochester City Council. We are now into our second to final segment. We have our final 2 candidates who are running for Ward 6. I am your co-moderator, Betsy Singer, with ABC 6 News, along with Randy Peterson from the Rochester Post Bulletin. We are doing this debate at 125 Live here in Rochester. We are broadcasting live on ABC6's social media platforms. And in this round, we will ask the exact same questions of the 2 candidates that we asked of our first 3 candidates for Ward 6 for fairness. We will start with a brief introduction that I have for the 2 of you, and then we will start with opening statements and proceed with questions. Our first candidate is Craig Euglund, who is a real estate agent, Minnesota Patriot Guard member, a former construction manager, and 2019 Take Back Rochester Grizzlies Appreciation Night organizer. Correct?
Close.
Close.
I'll straighten it out.
Molly Dennis works for the Rochester Public School District. She is the former lead program development coordinator in Moorhead, Fargo, with a background in human service leadership and volunteers with Mayo Clinic Hospice and serves on various boards. Welcome, candidates.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Craig, let's go ahead and start with you with your opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Betsy. So my name is Craig Euglund, and there are 3 things that I want you to remember from today. Number 1, the goal of my campaign and my election is to regain the trust for the City Council. Number 2, to improve communications and collaboration between all entities of our local government, schools, and employers. And number 3 is I ask for your vote in the primary on August 11th. I would like to also thank the sponsors for today, 125 Live, Randy with the Post Bulletin, and Betsy with KAAL, and your teams that are here to assist. And of course, everybody that's hanging on and watching online. This is a nonpartisan race. I am not sponsored or I am not endorsed by any parties. I don't feel that this is a career. To me, serving on your city council is an honor and a civic duty. Why am I running? I'm running because I don't like the direction that our city has headed. I was born and raised in Ward 6. I've left for a few years for school and to live in a few other cities, but I came back to Rochester because I'm passionate about this town and I love this town. But I'm scared of where we're headed. I think that we need to refocus our city on what's important and what the city is supposed to do. And in this current time, we need to eliminate some of the mission creep that's been happening as of late. I have been involved in our community for well over 15 years with many volunteer organizations. I'm on the board of directors and I'm the state captain for the Minnesota Patriot Guard Riders. I was one of the founders and was the lead for the Take Back Our Streets, which kept Alton Hills at 4 lanes instead of a 3-lane road diet. I'm involved with the Alton Hills Neighborhood Association and many other volunteer groups in the area. So I just ask you to remember those 3 things. I'm here to regain your trust, communication, and collaboration, and ask for your vote on August 11th. Thank you,
Todd. Molly?
All right, thank you. Sincere thank you to the hosts and for everyone who's sponsoring this event. But more importantly, I'd like to thank everyone for watching, because having taught overseas, I know how important democracy is and how fragile it is. We need involvement. I have been dedicated my whole life for service. Organized community gatherings like National Night Out. I've built longer tables. For inclusion, I've volunteered, like mentioned, for Mayo Hospice and Girl Scouts for over 10 years to empower and foster hope. I believe as a teacher, teaching high school biology and overseas, that teaching is service. It's not fame. And teachers dedicate their finite moments on this planet to build these doors of opportunity. I spend my work days every day holding the hands of the most vulnerable of our population, little children in wheelchairs who literally cannot speak. I am their voice and their advocate for inclusion. I've studied in college government, but not a politician. I worked in Washington, D.C. I researched legislation. I rode the subway with leaders and asked ideas about how to end hunger. For instance, Senator Daschle gave ideas about how, we talked on the subway, about how we could do expiration dates. And Senator George McGovern actually invited me and a few people to dinner to talk about how he helped with the school lunch program. I'm curious, so I asked for ideas, but no offense to Washington, I really think there's more creativity here in Rochester. So we need to empower those voices so that they can be part of the solution. Transparency is trust, and so you can visit my website to learn more about my leadership experiences, but most importantly, I care very deeply about people, and government is people. I am running to amplify the voices of the most vulnerable of our population and also those who are unrepresented, and I want to empower your voice and speak truth to power. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome candidates. We'll start off with a viewer question that seems appropriate for a race with 6 candidates. Some Rochester voters have asked for the adoption of ranked choice voting for city council and mayoral races. Do you support ranked choice voting? And we'll start with Molly Dennis.
Oh, well, definitely. Like I said, I love to research, so I've talked to a lot of people about ranked choice voting. Some of the highlights would be it's been millions over the world have been using it already. There's a 99.96% faith in the correctness and the 92% in the simplicity. There is no need for money for primary, so it's cheaper for taxpayers, and they have less negativity in campaigning, less influence on money, which is great for my campaign, and it enables people to talk to more voters. I mentioned in other forums that I can go to someone like Donovan sign in the yard, I'm like, oh, I agree with his politics, his ideas on diversity. Could I be your second choice? So you talk to more constituents. You have a longer time getting your, obviously some of us are going to be cut out in a couple weeks with the primary. We have a longer time to tell you our views. So I am a big supporter of choice rank voting. I believe it's a win-win-win for everyone, the taxpayers, and for government and democracy. So yes, I would definitely be in support of choice rank voting. Thank you.
And Todd, same question.
Yep. So I'm not as enthusiastic about it as Molly. I think there's more education that needs to be done from both sides. The Minneapolis did find out after their last elections that it was not a money saver to do the ranked choice voting. Duluth shot it down 2-1. So there's both sides to the story, and then somewhere in the middle is where probably most people are. But what I think it should be done is it should be put on the ballot for our community to vote on. Let's hear what our citizens have to say. Let them do the research. Let's inform them from all sides and let them make the decision that they feel is appropriate for their vote. Thank you.
The recent pay raises the council approved caught a lot of attention. Many agreed that the pay had not been increased in years, and council members were not being fairly compensated for the work that they were doing. Others argued a 140% pay increase was far too costly to the taxpayers, and that a position of public servant should not come at such a high cost. Your thoughts on those pay increases, and is the amount of what a council member is compensated part of the reason why you're running? Todd, we'll begin with you.
Craig?
Craig, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So ever since the Alton Hills project, I've been in attendance to most every council meeting up until COVID. I was there the night that this was proposed. It was proposed in new business at the end of a 4-hour meeting. They did the first reading for this to approve it and push it forward that night. Luckily, media, social media, news media got the word out, and our citizens voiced their opinions. Do I believe that the previous salaries were correct? No, I think that they were underpaid. But I think the process was completely inappropriate. My opinion is it should be an independent council. We have a lot of really smart people in Rochester. It should be a group of HR people, nonpartisan, political specialists that can do the research to look at other cities in and outside of Minnesota, not including Minneapolis-St. Paul. We are nothing like those towns. Yes, we're a city of the first class. I don't really think we want to associate ourselves with those towns right now. But I think this should be done by an independent council. The city council still has to give their final approval, but at least it keeps them at arm's length. And a non-biased decision can be made. The last part of that is that they should not be able to vote themselves a raise. That raise should be proactive following the next election. Thank you.
Is the compensation part of the reason why you're running?
I did not try to avoid that. No, it is not. Like I said when my opening.
Yeah, you don't have to explain, but you can.
This is civic duty to me. This is civics or civil service, and I would do it regardless if I was getting paid $21,000 or $39,000. Thank you.
Molly.
I completely agree with Mr. Euglund on the process. I think it should have been done differently. However, in the middle of the night, I couldn't. I got up for helping one of my children, and I saw that our current Congress member was not running because she said it was a full-time job. She said that it's impossible to do a full-time job and this at the same time. So the other candidates who were going to run at that time in that article on May 22nd said that they were running because they didn't agree with a pay raise. I absolutely agree. One of my platforms is livable wages. One of my platforms is diverse voices, and that empowers both of those. It allows people to have, and livable wages decrease crime. It's an incredible win-win to have better paying jobs. So I agree that we should have had a wage increase. I also believe that I'm very proud of my household. I would not have been able to run without wage, because I could not be a parent, a single parent, and also have two full-time jobs. So it empowered me to run, and I believe that just in general, when we look at the crisis is happening, this is going to be more than a full-time job. To research and talk to people, look at different options, empower voices, is going to be more than a full-time job. I know the mayor personally, and I know she does, and I feel that, and for the amount, I would say, yeah, I don't know exactly if that's the exact amount, but I know that women make less than men. The national average is $52,000 a year for women in Minnesota versus that's $69,000 a year for average for men. Women make less. They're often the caregivers. They don't have as many opportunities to work remotely. I think in general, a pay increase would allow more women to be able to run as well, which we need to empower. They're considered a minority when they're half the population. And I speak for that half of the voice that I believe that we need to empower people to run. And so I would say yes, I would have voted for that. And I believe that we need to look at all the other jobs so that we can all succeed. Thank you.
Is it one of the reasons why you chose to run as council?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even, kind of embarrassing. I didn't even know about it when I saw Annalisa was not running. I was looking at the school board, and then I said, well, I'm employed. I can't run for school board. So I was like, I'm not going to run. But then when I saw she was not running, I'm like, oh, well, I would never run against her. But I see the reasons, and then I learned about the pay raise after I decided to look into that.
That did not factor in. Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The City Council recently approved a plan for $5.1 million in federal CARES Act funding in response to the pandemic. What additional steps does the city need to take to help individuals and businesses recover? And we'll start with Molly Dennis.
Yeah, well, I looked a lot into this CARES Act. There's a wonderful things about helping small business partnerships, and it's a wonderful start. I am a little bit upset with the low amount given to outreach to target Black and Hispanic communities who have been impacted disproportionately. I believe that should have been more in the CARES Act, but I do think it's a start. Number one is always cut wasteful spending, to look, and I would, I guess I'm not really answering the question, but to help people keep above water. This is not a time to cut programs, definitely not mental health. I have talked earlier about my neighbor in Ward 6 who ended his life because of the loss of hope. We need to increase money for mental health, increase for education, because I see all the budget cuts happening there. We need to partner with businesses like the Jeremiah Project, which empowers women. I've been talking to construction companies. I've been talking to how we all fit together as an interconnected web, and I think that's something that I see through as a lens. If you're looking at one issue, it's actually connected to all. We need to start with education. We need to start empowering different mentorship programs, things like that, to create better jobs. So I would, I don't know if I answered the question, but I do believe that the CARES Act is a wonderful start, and we need more money to help, because this is an epidemic problem that's going to cause a lot of changes, and it's also a time that we can look at change. Great things happen because of crisis, and we can use this as an opportunity, build the doors of opportunity so that more people can succeed. Look at our revenue system, change that up. I really believe that this is a time for humanity to look at our priorities and reevaluate what's important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig Euglund, again. What additional steps does the city need to take to help individuals and businesses recover?
Absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, we need to work with the county so that we're not duplicating assistance and service. They have a fairly good chunk of change as well. I think we just need to make sure that we're not duplicating there. I think we need to be very pinpoint focused on where that money goes. We need to be very accountable that it's used for what it's meant to be used for. I know a big issue has been $750,000 for tree planting because it would create jobs for potential job loss. I think our focus should be on keeping our current jobs and getting people back to their previous employment in lieu of trying to create brand new jobs. And the people that I think that that's intended for, that's not what they specialize in. Let's get them back to work in what their specialization is. So that's my 2 cents.
Very good. Our next topic is on taxes. City Council candidates have expressed a desire to limit property tax increases because of this pandemic that we are in. How long should that continue? And what do you expect to see as a long-term impact of keeping those property taxes low? Craig.
Great question, Betsy. Thank you.
welcome.
So there's two things when it comes to our property taxes. The actual rate hasn't been increased for a year or two, and that's what some of the council members are patting themselves on the back for. The problem is our property values have increased. I'm very well aware of this, being in the real estate business. We can't do anything about the property values. That's because of our lack of inventory, which is another conversation. But what we can do is, if we need to possibly lower those property taxes for a short time to give people a break. We also need to end and stop adding additional user fees, street light fees, sidewalk maintenance fees. Those should all be done within the current city budget. We do get more taxes from the new developments in town, the new construction. But we also have to remember that all those fees that the builders pay and developers pay, those are all going right into those new homeowners, which is a huge issue with affordable or even appropriately priced housing. Again, that'll be another conversation. So,
Thank you. Molly.
Well, first, if you build more houses, if you build more affordable houses, property taxes go down. So we should definitely look at making more households for people who can be empowered. But just in general, property tax is a regressive form of taxation. I know when I was in college, I wrote an article for the Argus Leader, which is a Sioux Falls newspaper, and it made statewide because of their issues with property tax. And that is something that's something we just need to reimagine in general. We need to look at how we do revenue. Let's look at progressive forms. Obviously, we have an interesting town. We have a wage discrepancy. The median household income is $72,000, a little over $72,000, and that's because we have extremely rich and extremely poor, right, in our town. And we need to look at how we tax. And people who benefit from our world, I always taught that we give back. So I would look at maybe looking at the income tax situation. I would also look at things like sin tax, luxury taxes, maybe entertainment tax, things like that, but not property tax, because not everyone pays property tax equally, and it's disproportionate. It affects marginalized families, and like DMC nonprofits don't always pay that amount. So I would definitely look at lessening and keeping the property tax lower so that more people can stay in their homes, and we can just have a reimagine a prosperity for a new future. This is the time to do so. We need bold leadership. We need people who speak up and people who look and reimagine, because this is a time that we can actually level the playing field and look at all the discrimination and things that have founded our country, and people who can afford homes because of discrimination, people who can't because of a year-long before the affirmative action. So I feel like there is a lot to look at culturally, a lot to look at in our priorities, and I would not lower, I would keep property tax lower. Thank you.
Thank you. What actions would you support to address the rising cost of housing in the city? And we'll start with Molly.
Oh yeah, more housing, affordable housing. I mean, I think we need to look at, when it comes to affordable housing, I looked into some of the modify the ordinance of the land use manual to support the comprehensive plan for affordable housing. We need to look at the median property values. I support a very integrated comprehensive system to look, I'm sorry, Randy, could you repeat the question one more time?
What actions would you support to address the rising cost of housing in the city?
Yeah, just build more housing. I mean, we need to make sure that people can afford housing. We can. We need to talk to DMC. See, when I talked to the construction companies, they talked about the incentives. The TIF is very interesting if you look at what they can spend money on and what they can't spend money on. Look at incentives for construction to make more affordable housing, maybe do loan situations that can be paid back so that they can afford to start the process. I think that home ownership empowers our place of our identity comes a lot from where we live. And so I would just support building more homes, affordable homes, so that everyone can have a chance to succeed in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. And Craig, what actions would you support to address the rising cost of housing in the city?
This is an unfair advantage. This is my bread and butter. So affordable housing is a national issue. This isn't Minnesota. This isn't a Rochester thing. This is nationally. And the first thing we need to do that will help address some of the affordable housing is we need to support those organizations that specialize in this. The Rochester Area Foundation, right across the road, they have a great First Homes project where they're helping subsidize home purchases. We also need to work with streamlining the permitting process for our builders. For instance, a developer, a business owner is trying to put in a business in downtown. It's a 4-week fit out. Their approval process is 8 weeks. All they're trying to do is fit out a space. That is not appropriate. So we need to streamline the system. At Building and Safety, they have been presented a way to do that, but they need to implement it. So our ward covers a pretty interesting group of housing in Rochester. When it was built for essentially IBMers. And a lot of those IBMers and other professionals can't afford to leave their houses. Their houses have been paid off for 20 years. But they can't afford to move into a newer townhome or whatnot because the cost of that townhome is so expensive to build because of the $30,000 to $40,000 per lot in city fees. So if we can make that price range, that step-down housing affordable for our seniors, that will free up neighborhoods like Sunset Terrace, Alton Hills, Gage. We don't have enough money to subsidize affordable housing for everything. Another thing that we need to do is we need to relax our rules and regulations. The city needs to make sure that homes are built safe, but they need to back up and let builders build what they can to be affordable. If you look at the neighborhood by Essex Estate, there's 0 lot lines, there's semi-detached homes that don't have to have garages and they're smaller footprints. The city needs to allow builders to build those again because those are affordable homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Where do you stand, Molly? This is our final question before closing statements. Where do you stand on spending money on our local law enforcement as they ask for additional resources, equipment, and more officers?
Well, safety is always one of the main priorities of the city in crime prevention. And so we work with the mayor, with the police department. As a parent, safety is always number one, and as probably with everyone as well. I believe that we need to always focus on safety, but we need also look at the history of trauma in our country and know, like I said, that our biases have been backed by the weight and power of institutional racism, and we have to look at that culture as well. And so we have a wonderful police department. I mentioned that before. I support the idea of our chief saying that we need to hire integrity and then teach skills. I believe that the training is great with crisis intervention, de-escalation, partnership with first responders. I believe all of that is wonderful. The Obama's 21st plan are all fabulous starts. But I also believe when we look at putting money, I mentioned this in another forum, that we call the police, you have firefighter, you call the ambulance. The police does everything. And so we need to specialize that with money into social work and money into programs, because there's a lot of issues with mental health. I know that some of the questions aren't going to be asked, but mental health is a serious issue. They say 3 out of 5 people in the survey with NPR says that people are experiencing loneliness, depression, anxiety, and that's before the pandemic. I feel that we need to invest in social work, invest in education. That CROs should probably be looked at more as like what paraprofessionals, people who know the students, who build relationships with them, who have training in connection. I believe that kind of money should go to people who are specialized. So when it comes to helping the police, I am a supporter of the Rochester Police Department, but I am also supporting resources being used who trust the experts, always trust the experts. And if you have an expert in relationship building with students, utilize that. If you have expert in mental health, trust, and have our funding go to those. Thank you.
Craig, where do you stand on spending money on law enforcement when it comes to adding resources, police officers, and equipment?
Absolutely. So I have been very vocal on my support for law enforcement and the fact that we need to stop vilifying them. We need to remember that these are our family members, our friends, our neighbors, and they are part of our community. And we need to support them, and we need to help them do their jobs better. And that includes not just continuing ed type training, but they need to do consistent training throughout the year to deal with mental health issues. If I believe that if there had been some more training in the mental health, if there had been more training in dealing with people with mental health issues, the incident with Albert Dashow a few years ago might have had a different outcome. I think it's very important that Chief Franklin continues to improve the community relationship between his officers and our community. The Safe Streets initiative that happened last year was a great program. The police had basically 6 open houses throughout the community in conjunction with Public Works. I attended the one up at Watson Field and over at Harry Bishop, and they were extremely well attended. And it got the police officers onto the same level as our community. And we need to continue doing things like that. When I was a kid on Mountain Hills Drive, I remember chasing down police officers going for those Vikings football player cards. We need to bring back simple programs like that. As Melly had touched base with, we need to continue and probably add school resource officers to get full-time SROs in our junior highs. Those are the kids that are most impressionable. And that's where we have an opportunity to direct them to believe and trust our police and to keep them from bad stigmas about police and hating police because of what they may have learned elsewhere in the community. So I am all for continued funding and prioritizing funding for our law enforcement.
Thank you, Craig.
Yep.
Molly, we're going to start with closing statements. If you want to go ahead and begin.
Sure. There's a lot of questions I would love to have answered about education and environment and things that we didn't cover, such as when we talked about the SAFE initiative and some of the misinformation there. But I feel like the Safe Street program. But I want to say again, thank you. Last Thursday at the League of Women Forum, I was driving away and my van was making this weird noise, and so I went. Took it to a local business to have it checked out, and I had to have my brakes replaced yesterday at just shy of $400. I work full-time, and that bill was 1/3 of my monthly income. So I know the struggles that people in Ward 6 and people in Rochester are facing. These are real problems. These aren't designer bags or where we're going to go on vacation. These are that we are struggling here to make ends meet. And I will work hard, and I'm going to be dedicated full-time, if you look at my website, I've mentioned, so that everyone can succeed. I don't have any big money in my pocket. I just have a deep obligation to do what is right and live with intention, so that intention of service. I'm running for city council for my children, my Girl Scout troop. I'm running for every child's future. Because we need to look at how we can make a difference with our finite time. I watched TED Talks and listened to NPR, but this morning I heard Alanis Morissette saying how frustrated she was with apathy. Well, I am terrified of apathy. We cannot wait for the next distraction. We need to act now. We need to vote. We need to help people vote. I would love it if you voted for me. Get out and vote for someone, please, in the primary in a couple weeks. Together we can dream big, reimagine, we can end the silent covenants, we can change the narrative, we can be on the correct side of history, or her story. We have to look at our culture. I'm running to amplify the diverse voices, amplify the vulnerable voices, amplify the unrepresented, to empower your voice and speak truth to power. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Craig.
As I started out with, I want you to remember 3 things about me as a candidate. I'm here to regain your trust. My goal is to improve communication and collaboration throughout Rochester government and community, and I'm asking for your vote on August 11th and November 3rd. As I've said before, this is not a partisan race to me. I'm not sponsored by any party one way or the other. It's a civic service to me, and that's to improve our community for our children and our parents. We need Rochester to get back to the basics. our government to get back to the basics: safety, public works, parks and trails, and economic development. We need to ease up on our citizens. We need to ease up on our user fees, our city taxes, our business taxes. Their taxes have been going through the roof with increases lately. I have a passion for this town. I grew up down the road. My house now is less than 1.5 miles from the house I grew up in, and I'm still in Alton Hills neighborhood. But as a realtor, I know the entire city of Rochester. I drive the city every week. I talk to people all over town. Being a city council representative, I'm not just representing Ward 6. I would be representing the entire city. I would be one of 7 votes. So I'm here to listen to everybody throughout town. To me, whether it's a full-time job or not, the hours are definitely there. I'm willing to work 2 full-time jobs. I'm okay with that. I've done it before. I'll do it again with pleasure to serve my community. So again, I'm here to regain your trust. I'm here to improve communication and collaboration throughout our city, and I'm asking for your vote on August 11th and November 3rd. For more information on my campaign, please visit voteuglund.com. Thank you.
Craig Euglund and Molly
Euglund.
Dennis for Ward 6. I appreciate you both being here and answering our questions. Thank you. We will take another break, and our final segment will be next, and that is among the 3 candidates who are running for the City Council President position, and we will resume that in about 5 minutes.